And I would say not only is the country a difficult place and population to manage, but this period, this decade, or the years surrounding this decade have been and continue to be challenging times. And those are two positions that I want to put as the foundation of any position I take with you today. And therefore, you may ask, what exactly are our priorities? Why is it that this period is different and challenging? What makes it different and challenging? For me in Trinidad and Tobago, I think that what we grew up on, the challenges, have not left us. In fact, some of the journeys that we have made, we are being asked to travel those same courses again, especially in our relationship with people outside our border. I have a book downstairs in my library, which it's a book of the history of mankind by a Dutch writer called Van Loon. I got that book as a prize when I wrote O-levels in Bishop's Tobago. I won the history prize, and that book was the prize. It carries the school logo, and it's autographed by my teacher, who happened to have been the mother of the last Attorney General. And that book set me on a path right up to today, where I became and remained a student of history. And when I entered serious politics in this country in 1974, when I joined the PNM, coming from NJAC, the PNM, as you know, was formed and led by an outstanding historian, Dr. Eric Williams. And I fed on a lot of his writings, his sayings, his work. And eventually, today, I can talk to you as a former Prime Minister of this country, in the country that Dr. Williams helped fashion, and history is still examining us as we are examining history as it's being made. You know, a lot of things have been happening in public policy in the last year, in the last 6 months, in the last 3 months for Trinidad and Tobago. And all of it, I would say, are reflections and continuation of global changes that we have been impacted by ever since we were here. The issues that our government, our country, have been called upon to deal with in the last few months are issues of imperialism versus colonialism. Those are the two issues that we have been asked to deal with. And they're not new. Going way back, as far back as you want to go in history, you will find that there have been nations that sought to dominate the world as they knew it. You want to go back to Genghis Khan, you want to go back to Alexander the Great, you want to go back to Nero in Rome, you want to go to Hitler, you want to go to the British Empire, of which we were a part, you want to go to the United States, which is now telling the world that we are the greatest now, the number one. That is history. You young people who are in front of me here, most of you have no idea how we are positioned in the geopolitics of today. And therefore you are easily influenced and lied to by people in office who are unprepared or unwilling to confront the issues of the nation. This is an era, whether it's abroad or in Trinidad and Tobago, where politicians have seen the virtues of lying to the population. And therefore, where they are required to show knowledge of the issue, it's all hidden, and they throw out to you and overwhelm you with social media moronic offerings. I'm older than all of you here, and I'm older than most people in this country. But the period when I grew up, I was in 4th form in high school when the Vietnam War started. You ever heard of the Vietnam War? You know how it started? It started by an American ship called the Maddox, going kind of a little bit provokingly close to a coastline, and the people there responded by trying to push it out. The ship was attacked. That was sufficient to open the door for the Vietnam War. But one ship wasn't enough to sell the case at home. If you look at the historians' summary of that and another incident with another ship called the Trinidad Tobago, the historians will tell you the part of the story about the Trinidad Tobago being attacked was a lie, but it was required to sell the story at home to get permission to start the war. And that Vietnam War resulted in millions of lives being lost. And it came right home to the streets of the United States, where pitched battles were fought over should we, shouldn't we. Some of our nationals here fought in that war. Right? Today, in Trinidad and Tobago, where we have had sound, non-aligned policy, because our leaders, our founding fathers, whether it is Eric Williams, whether it is Sukaran, whether it is Robinson, we found that in this traumatic period or other periods like it, the best place to be is non-aligned. And when we were not aligned, we could have dealt with and be respected by anybody, anywhere in the world. You all are too young to know when mainland China was not China at the UN. It was the people in Taiwan who had the seat. Trinidad and Tobago was a newly independent nation in 1962, led by a historian, Dr. Williams, took the position that while that may sound logical and reasonable and truthful to some people, that China is Taiwan, an island off the coast of China, we as an independent, non-aligned nation, we support the point of view that mainland China is China, and we voted. When 75 countries voted at the UN to kick out Taiwan and replace Taiwan with China, Trinidad and Tobago voted in support of China. The Chinese government recognized that to this day and hold Trinidad and Tobago in very high esteem, because as a small island independent nation, we could have taken that action. 34 nations, led by the United States, did not vote in favor of that. That's history. Today, China has moved from one of the poorest countries in the world, 1 billion people, where they had famine during my lifetime in China, fought a war against the Western Allies in Korea. But because we've taken a principled position in the beginning, at the end of the day, we maintain our self-respect, we preserve our sovereignty, and we are respected by the rest of the world. There are those who would ask us to have nothing to do with China, or demand that we have nothing to do with China. But how could we, in today's world where China is the country, the second largest economy in the world, of the 10 largest banks in the world, the first 4 are Chinese banks. How could we want the benefit of being a participant in the world's economy where we signed on to the WTO, which has replaced the GATT, And we are no longer in the mercantile system as a British colony tied to only the British economy. How could we take advice from people telling us they don't want us to have anything to do with China? And that is what a Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago has to face. I faced it. But I protected the people in this country by staying with the principle of non-alignment that took us from 1962 to 2025. That's the principle. The same principle that Bazio Pandey followed, that Robinson followed, that Chambers followed. Today, this country has made a dramatic change in dealing with our position of non-alignment in a turbulent world. And that is why you could see the Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister getting up and her government finding it necessary to express support for the United States attack on Iran. Where did that come from? Where did that come from? And that's not a singular accident. On the troublesome matter of Palestine, again, you people are too young to know when the Palestinians used terror, hijacked. There was a time every morning, the news was which plane was hijacked. You go on a plane anywhere in the world, you could expect to be brought down by hijackers. Palestinians were fighting for their homeland. And Trinidad and Tobago, they're non-aligned, as we were, talking to all who are in the world, at the UN and elsewhere, voting resolution after resolution on this matter. Our position has been, I don't know what it is now, but our position has been that the solution to this problem is a two-state solution where Israel has the right to exist and the Palestinians ought to be allowed to have their homeland in the context that we support people determining, as Tobago is saying now, you should determine our future. We should determine our future, not others. And where the Palestinian issue is, Trinidad and Tobago's foreign policy has always been that we support the two-state situation. And like Dr. Williams' situation with mainland China being found to be correct in the end, we believe that someday in the end, our policy will prevail. Our support for that policy will prevail because we see no other reasonable outcome. Genocide is not a good outcome. Ethnic cleansing is not a good outcome. So when the government of Trinidad and Tobago today says, I support your policy, which policy? You supporting genocide in Palestine? You supporting ethnic cleansing in Palestine? We're too stupid to understand what's going on. The door at Rafah is closed. You won't let people through. They're hungry, they're starving, they have nowhere to live. You close the door at Rafah. But when you chase away 1 million people in 1 week from their home, you open the door at Rafah. Meaning, we're chasing you out. That's called ethnic cleansing. That is happening today. And the question is, where does Trinidad and Tobago stand in these matters? It stands with Trinidad and Tobago government saying, we support your policy. Saying that to people in Washington who can't even get support for that policy among their own people. So the question I want to ask today as a Prime Minister of recent vintage in Trinidad and Tobago who left our non-aligned policy intact, my question today to Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, when you say to the Washington that we support your policy, which policy are you supporting? Because there's a whole plethora of policies that are now coming to the fore, requiring a position from Trinidad and Tobago. Is it the policy that we are reliving the whole question of the civil rights movement, where people are now having to fight for their vote, where if you're of a certain color of your skin, or you speak a certain language, or you come from a certain country, you are to be thrown out from the country in the way that is happening right now? We have 275,000 people in the United States from Trinidad and Tobago. Which policy do you support? So that is out there. But one of the big issues that we have in this country, and had for quite some time, is the whole issue of safety and security as threatened by violent crime in our society. When I was Prime Minister, this issue was front and center stage. Of course, for the opposition, it was red meat and political platform to talk about crime. Every crime in this country was the Prime Minister's failing. How many times I've been accused of, as Prime Minister, of not preventing this from happening, and the Prime Minister, unfortunately, the blood still flows. Last night, 4 people got killed in the last 24 hours. That's normal. Doesn't even make the news. But we can't treat with these issues if we lie about them or personalize them. We will not engage. It will just rotate from one government to another. So when we as CARICOM hold our position as non-aligned in the world and telling CARICOM and leading in CARICOM that we are stronger together. If we go out singularly, we're going to be picked off one by one and made a jackass of. But if we stand together, speak together as one people, as one, we talk about the Caribbean nation. CARICOM is one of the oldest international bodies of its kind in the world, successful. When it was 50 years old, we had a big celebration here in Trinidad. Dominica was supposed to be the chair. Dominica gave way to Trinidad and Tobago so we can hold the celebration in Chagaramas. That's what Trinidad and Tobago was. And as far as the United States was concerned, they were represented by a leading delegation at CARICOM's 50th anniversary, because the relationship, there was never, and there is never any question about our relationship of friendship with the United States. But there's a question of respect, sovereignty, and vassal status. So we're fighting crime. A new government comes in while I'm here, retired last March. A new government came in 1st of May or thereabouts. So I could look on and see, what is it they're going to do that's different? Because we did the best we could. The problem is very intransigent. Let's see what they're going to do. They had a plan. They didn't tell us that the plan was to hand our country over to support the policy of some other country outside. And what is worse, Trinidad and Tobago today, the crime plan in Trinidad and Tobago today, the chairing of success of the crime plan in Trinidad and Tobago today is one where we are running afoul of a very fundamental principle that we got our independence on and that we are living on and being defended by, and it's the rule of law. I took the trouble last night to go into my library and find the best description of extrajudicial killing, because that has dominated our news for this year. Where does Trinidad and Tobago stand at a time when extrajudicial killings are so front and center stage? One, the government refused to accept or to engage the fact that even one or more of our nationals have been so killed. There's a lawsuit right now in the United States. I don't know if you all know that. There's a lawsuit in the United States now going on, progressing in the United States, where frontline lawyers are accusing and suing the United States government on behalf of 2 families in Trinidad and Tobago who have been killed extrajudicially. The question that one has to ask, where does the government of Trinidad and Tobago stand in that situation? You know where they stand? The Prime Minister and the Attorney General, who are the country's 2 constitutional offices, they are the 2 people in the cabinet who must be in the cabinet. The others, they have to be there. Those 2 must be there. The Prime Minister tells the world about the wonders of American, the throwaway phrase now, kinetic strike. There are two things that have become throwaway words in Trinidad and Tobago. One is OFAC license, and the other is kinetic strike. Kinetic strike means the power and skill of the United States military can physically kill you at will. Trinidad and Tobago supports that. Let me, for the benefit of this population, particularly the young people, and for the older people who have not had the exposure that we have had, to understand what is being offered to us today. And I don't want anybody in this country to tell me that PNM and UNC is the same thing. We are not. There's no way a PNM government could be truthfully accused of being this, advancing this, or supporting this. So for the benefit of the population, coming out of my library, I prepared this so that we can't say we don't know. When they feed us what they're feeding us, we cannot say we don't know. We must say we choose that or we don't care. And I read for you from the authorities. Extrajudicial killing is the unlawful killing of a person by government authorities, security forces, or other agents of the state without due process of law. I want to repeat that for the benefit of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Extrajudicial killing is the unlawful killing of a person by government authorities, security forces, or other agents of the state without due process of law. That forms no part of the policy of the governments of Trinidad and Tobago up until recently. It goes on to say, it excludes the framework of the judicial system. It occurs without a fair trial, without legal judgment or proper legal procedures. That is what prevails today. So when our Prime Minister says, I support your policy, and praise the American military for killing people on suspicion, without a shred of evidence being presented to justify what has been done, and turn their back on our citizens who have been killed in that way. This is what we are now advancing as our policy to the world. It goes on to say, it violates fundamental right to life, the principle of the rule of law, and it elevates suspicion above the tested evidence in every situation. Suspicion is good enough to strike kinetically. Suspicion is good enough to disregard the judicial system. Suspicion is good enough to disregard the fundamental principle, doesn't matter how heinous the crime, that you're innocent until proven guilty. The government of Trinidad and Tobago has now subscribed to that as our policy. That is the crime policy for Trinidad and Tobago. And we will learn that it is usually accompanied by, and Trinidad and Tobago, listen to this, it is usually accompanied by 1, political repression, 2, armed conflict, and 3, attempts to silence dissent. Those are 3 of the conditions that are associated with extrajudicial killing when it becomes policy of a state. Now, we are not inventing this. Around the world, a number of states had experimented with that. But international bodies in the civil law area have condemned it. as unacceptable in a society that gives due cognizance to the rule of law. And the United Nations have condemned it. But Trinidad and Tobago has picked it up to please who? And has taken that as that is our crime policy. So today, there are questions being asked about foreign military people in our country, questions not being answered, being lied to about their arrival, being lied to about their purpose. And let me just take this moment here now to tell you something. How many of you have been looking on at what has been happening in the Middle East? The United States has attacked Iran. And what has happened after that? Virtually every country west of Iran and south of Iran has been struck by Iran. As I speak to you now, it must have been an hour or two ago, they managed to open the airspace over Dubai in the Emirates. Biggest, largest airport in the world couldn't open because Iran is firing missiles there. And let me just say something to Trinidad and Tobago. After all the foolishness that our government did in ditching our non-aligned policy and becoming a virtual combatant against Venezuela, just ask yourself, had there been a hot war with Venezuela, why do you think that we would have been different to Bahrain and Dubai and whoever else the Iranians are striking now? Tell me. Most of those countries didn't attack Iran. None of them had been seen and been called as combatants when Iran was being attacked. But when the battle started, Iran struck everybody. That is where the UNC government had placed Trinidad and Tobago. If the United States had to be so aggressive in actually carrying on a fight with Venezuela, where the Venezuelan military was engaged to respond and retaliate, Trinidad and Tobago was in the firing line. Is only good luck from God the Trinis why they managed to settle what they came to Venezuela to settle and did not involve Venezuela retaliating the way Iran is retaliating now. We were right there in the firing line because that radar, which is now being picked up to be taken out, they said it was brought here for us to find people in the Mang and in the sea and so on. It was a piece of equipment on wheels. It was on wheels because it is to be mobile, because you expect it to be a target when you use it. And having described us in the most disgraceful way as a country, when you tell us that you are doing certain things for certain purpose, all of a sudden, this government justifies its abandonment of our fundamental principles. It justifies putting us in harm's way. It justifies converting us into a vassal state by saying we are getting the benefit in a fight against narco-terrorists. It's all about fighting narco-terrorists, a phrase that has been developed elsewhere for other purposes. That is a tool for political maneuvering. That phrase, narco-terrorism, that they're pushing in your face now to justify all that they're doing, which is not answering questions, not telling you what they're going to do, not telling you who's doing it, and can't tell you what benefit we get from it. Because if we get such great benefit, that 42% of murders have gone down because of the US being here on the radar, why are they going? Don't you want to get to zero? But the original objective, the political maneuvering, has been successful. So they don't need us anymore. But when they needed it, they didn't care if we ended up like Bahrain, like Oman, like the people who now having missiles rained at them, simply because they are in the wrong place at the wrong time, supporting the wrong thing. That is what our government did to us. So I don't want anybody telling me that the PNM and the UNC is the same thing. Because we, the PNM, celebrated 70 years last, whenever, I don't know whichever day it was, because my colleagues didn't invite me. But I could find out the time, right? I ran the PNM for 15 years, 5 years in opposition, 10 years in government, won 2 general elections. And the PNM is celebrating 70 years as a political party in this country. And I had to hear about it. But I'll deal with that later on. Anyway, we in the PNM never put this country in that situation. We prided ourselves in being a small island nation, a pillar and stalwart in CARICOM, highly respected at the United Nations. We chaired the United Nations last year. We were the president of the United Nations General Assembly last year. We were on the verge of pushing forward to go for a second time for a seat on the Security Council. We served there once before. We were just about to open our campaign. This government says yes, they will continue. But who is going to vote for Trinidad and Tobago at the United Nations when we have demonstrated that we have no opinion of our own and that we are simply a mouthpiece for others? And we sacrifice decades of successful, non-aligned foreign policy. For what? For what? I don't know. Maybe it's worth it. But until the price is paid, I don't know. What I do know for a fact is that we have sacrificed our international image, our decades of growth from year 1 to year 63 as an independent nation, and we've sacrificed our commitment to CARICOM, where we were the voice of CARICOM saying, we are stronger together. But don't feel too bad. This is not the first CARICOM Prime Minister who were invited to do that. It's the first one from Trinidad and Tobago that agreed. But other CARICOM Prime Ministers have faced similar pressures, similar invitations. In CARICOM, you still have people in CARICOM who have their own decision, support Taiwan as China. They get a benefit and they go along, and we can survive with differences in the international geopolitics. We must survive. It is when you commit, to one side or the other, or one side against another, that is what limits your options. At the same time, Trinidad and Tobago and other Caribbean countries are being told about the horrors of communism and not to go anywhere near communist, because Trinidad and Tobago has very good relations with communist China. As a matter of fact, for decades, the general secretary of our party would be invited to go and see what the Chinese do at the annual or biennial meeting, and they will go. 1 or 2 of our young people will go for the experience, but we have never advocated communism as a policy of our government here as against democracy. We've never. To know and to see communism close up doesn't mean that we are going to become communists. And interestingly enough, you again are too young to know this. Up until 2000, when the WTO came into full force and full swing, the competition between nations is always there, and it was there. China has something called most favored nation status with the United States. With the United States. There was a US ambassador here. Every time he spoke to me, he almost broke into tears, complaining about Trinidad and Tobago's relationship with China. And I had to remind him, you have China as having with you most favored nation status. That has to do with trade. It has to do with finance. It has to do with everything. So what are we to do as a small nation of 1.3 million people? We are to survive between these gears. I see the Attorney General. I didn't see it in the Parliament, I read it in the papers. The Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago having to be published that he is in the clear because he got legal advice from somebody in England that says that these kinetic strikes that are killing people in the ocean are legal. That is Trinidad and Tobago's Attorney General providing support for the Prime Minister and her government who's supporting the policies that I just mentioned. Now, I have no doubt you might have got it, but it's interesting that that lawyer cannot give that advice to the country of his origin. Because at the same time, our Attorney General is getting advice from an English lawyer that this extrajudicial killing is good for you because you are defending yourself in a war. The British government, who gave that lawyer permission to practice law in England, is saying publicly that they do not support and have an issue with the extrajudicial killing in the Caribbean Sea. But we are talking about a British lawyer telling our Attorney General, if you suspect somebody, that person now becomes a combatant in war with you and you're free to kill them with a kinetic strike as invited by another country. Let us take the logic down the road, a little closer to home. If it is that our Attorney General on our behalf and our Prime Minister on our behalf accepting that this war that we are in, it is okay to kill people on the ocean on suspicion. Isn't it easier to kill people on land on the same suspicion? When does that policy end? It ends by Nicarcus? It ends in Blanchisseuse? If you are quite prepared to accept extrajudicial killing on the water, interestingly, it was this same Prime Minister when she became Prime Minister the last time, who told the country, you don't need to do anything out there on the water. You need to fight crime on land. And that was the policy that caused her to give away the two OPVs, take back the money from the English and spend it as she saw fit. And we had no offshore patrol vessels. My government found the money and bought two of the best offshore patrol vessels in this nation ever had. Those CG-41 and CG-42. They can go out to sea and stay for 4 weeks patrolling our distant waters. But I have to listen to people from the UNC saying that the PNM government and Rowley did nothing about crime, and that's why crime overran this country. The same people. And you now have a policy that it's okay to kill people in the water without reference to anything that is judicially sound. I'm putting you all on notice now that that is a clear inducement for our security services to kill people on land. And you know who know that? You know who know that? The United States. Because when I was Prime Minister, they approached me, threatening me with the Leahy Act for named police officers who, to them, they had information, if they are to be believed, where our local police officers had been killing people extrajudicially. Last 2 days ago, a person was murdered in Sangre Grande. Interestingly enough, that person happened to have been a frontliner in the election campaign in Sangre Grande. I know because I observed the campaign from close up. I wasn't leading the PNM at the time, but I was close enough to know what was going on in the various constituencies. We were holding that Sangre Grande seat, and we were fighting for it. We had to win that seat if we were going to win government. So we knew what our opponents were doing. There was a particular gentleman who was a mover and shaker against us in that campaign. Literally, the wings beneath which the UNC candidate flew. Today he's a minister. We had a period of state of emergency here, and the reason given then to the president was that a minister's life was being threatened. That person was picked up under the powers of the state of emergency and kept until the power expired. The person came out from there, we got another state of emergency, and then the person is executed in Sangre Grande in broad daylight. And this government, this UNC wants us to believe that there's no connection between that period of history and that incident in Sangre Grande. But while that is so, my prime minister could go in the parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, where people are being killed extrajudicially in a region by the most powerful military in history, as they like to boast. The most powerful military in the world have carte blanche to kill people extrajudicially because of narco-terrorism business. The Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago uses the office of Prime Minister and the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago to go and say in the Parliament that the PNM has built its buildings at Tranquility Street off money from narco traffickers. Now, bear with me. Doesn't that drive you to a position to want to be able to react in kind? PNM, you know, 70 years we ran this country from government or supported it in opposition. And the Prime Minister, who has converted our nation into a vassal state, gives a notification that she has an important statement to make in the Parliament. So I pay attention, because my Prime Minister is making an important statement. I'm still literally a news junkie. And that is what the Prime Minister goes to the Parliament to say. Well, today, I want to tell Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, I led the PNM. I joined the PNM in 1974. I held high office in the PNM from 1987. I served the PNM in opposition in government as a minister of government, and I led the party for 15 years. The last 15 years before this statement, I led this party. And today, when the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago goes to the Parliament and says that work that took place in Balizé House under my stewardship was funded by narco-terrorists, I want to say to Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar today, I told this country before that you're a jamet, and today, if they can't come in front of me and show me an iota of evidence to support that allegation, I say again that we are unfortunate to have a jamet as the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, because only a jamet will do something like that, make a statement like that, and not be able to provide a modicum of proof or truth to support it. You would go inside the Parliament and say that, and accusing the PNM of pedophilia. You support the policies of Washington. Are you supporting the Epstein files being hidden? Devant Mirage, a former colleague of mine in the parliament, a minister of government in this country, left here and he went to Canada. He's now in Canada. When the issue of human trafficking came to the fore in Trinidad and Tobago, Devant Mirage left Canada, came to Trinidad, sat down with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and gave them testimony in an affidavit about his first-hand knowledge about colleague of his who engaged in human trafficking in the UNC, in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And he told the police that Mrs. Prasad Bisesa knows about it because she was told about it. You know what she did? You know what she did? She didn't allow the accused to run for election because he might lose on this issue. So she took him out, gave him a Senate position, and make him a minister of government in my country. So here you have a minister of government on testimony to the police, and I hope and I suspect that there's a police investigation going on this matter. And rather than address that, being buried somewhere in the police service, you come into parliament to put on Hansard without a shred of evidence. Because they don't have to have any evidence, they just say so. I was in Australia battling and struggling to get those 2 ferries for Tobago, the APT James and the Buku Reef, to put a proper link between Trinidad and Tobago. Because the money was available in a new program in Australia, we were the first to borrow money from that program to buy CG41 and CG42. You know what Mrs. Prasad Bisesa and Wade Mark did as UNC under her tutelage? They wrote the Australia Attorney General and told him that there was corruption in this arrangement between me and Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister of Australia. And that was after they had written to the Australia opposition making the same kind of allegation. But that's not new. That's not new. When Patrick Manning government went out in full public, inviting people to come and bid for the OPVs, and the British firm won it, an Australian firm was in the running, a German firm was in the running, the British firm won it. They wrote the British Serious Crime Office and made allegations against Patrick Manning, saying that there was corruption between Manning and his government and Vosper Thornycroft to build those 2 vessels. Not a shred of evidence. That's what the UNC has been doing and has been doing, and now they come talking about pedophilia and narco trafficking. And what do you think outsiders will say? They will say the Prime Minister says so. Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister told the Parliament that the PNM is involved in narco trafficking. So maybe I have to expect now that they'll come and pick me up here and carry me away like Maduro too, because that's what he was accused of. So far, I have not seen the evidence. There's a court matter in the United States if it ever comes to that. And we expect that if judicial processes prevail in Washington or wherever else in New York, that evidence will be brought forward. But to be accused of narco trafficking, and you know who was beating that pan behind the Maduro story? Kamla Prasad Bisesa. And let me go a little further. I went to Antigua with a passport from Trinidad and Tobago. As soon as I came out of the Prime Minister's office on March 16th, I had my passport changed. I got a brand new passport immediately after that says former Prime Minister. But it happened so quickly. It was in that month when all of this thing happened. When I left office, March, the election was in April and so on. I turned up in Antigua. The Trinidad and Tobago authorities told the Antiguans that I am traveling on an unofficial passport because they thought I was still traveling on the Prime Minister passport. But of course, my passport was brand new saying former Prime Minister. So if I had gone to Montserrat on that passport that I had in my possession, that is what they were hoping that I was going to be embarrassed and turned back in Antigua. That's who they are. That's who they are. So today, I just want to let the population know that in PNM 70 years, we've climbed many mountains. We met many people along the way. but we only met one Kamala Prasad Bisesa. And that is why this behavior, this country's image. So you don't care that you're damaging the country's image with this lie. That the Prime Minister is telling the Parliament that the previous Prime Minister was engaged with narco traffickers. Narco trafficking is big business in some countries in South America, as is and was judicial killing. I don't know how many of you know what happened in Chile, what happened in Brazil with respect to extrajudicial killings. It was in the 70s, late 60s and 70s, it was normal. Military coups, normal in South America. I worked in South America for many, many years through UWI. I worked as far as Chile. I know, I've been there. So when my experience was in the Vietnam War, it was the Israeli wars in the East with the Palestinians. It was a South American experience, and it was being in the office of the Prime Minister, where people were coming to you with their version of the world, their version of their decisions, telling you what you should and shouldn't do, what you should be and shouldn't be, I had to go from here to Washington with Mia Motley and one other Caribbean Prime Minister to sit down and have people accuse Trinidad and Tobago of engaging in offshore banking, and as a result of that, our bank should be de-risked and we should not be allowed to enter the American banking system. Because there are some people in the world who believe that money to be made from offshore banking should only be made by a certain class of people. It's okay to have offshore banking in islands in Europe, in the islands in the Caribbean. But even if we were involved in offshore banking, they were coming to tell us, no, we should be penalized for that. You all don't know what your leaders have to do to defend you, you know. I could tell you, during COVID, there was a Caribbean country that did not have, I think they only had 2 of those machines that people use. When you reached the point of requiring you were a high dependency patient. You all might have heard that phrase during COVID. We had quite a few of those machines and we had a special hospital doing that also. But this country only had 2 of those machines. An outstanding citizen of that country abroad bought 6 and sent it home to her country. And was stopped in the airport and said, so you can't have that, take it back. That's the world we live in. You all would have seen where we couldn't get a vaccine, we had money, we paid for vaccine in a UN program, paid up front. And when the vaccines became available, you couldn't get one. Of course, our opposition friends made mass with that. Rowley ain't get no vaccine, Rowley. And when we got the vaccine, they accused us of giving people nothing to kill them. They want investigation. That's one of the things that I have not seen yet. I haven't seen the investigation that were promised into COVID and all the things that happened during COVID. We had 65 lawsuits, cost $15 million with them fighting us over COVID. Today, looking back 1 year later, and the last point I want to make is this. We are on very, very thin ice right now with respect to the protection of our national business at Point Lisas, where gas for petrochemicals are required to be protected in some policy of gas allocation and not just be carried away by more money for gas through LNG. And this government is showing no competence, no interest in managing the inherent conflicts that exist there so that we can survive both with LNG and petrochemicals. There is an inherent conflict because we, in the PNM government, we had 10% in Train 1, which has since been closed. We had 11% in Train 4. But we spent a lot of years fighting and successfully managed to merge Trains 2, 3, and 4. And we have interest in Trains 2, 3, and 4. So now that temporarily the war is pushing the gas price up. There's a temptation to forget who we are. We are petrochemical producers and we are LNG sellers, both. But NGC is the gas supplier and is also a shareholder in LNG. So there's that conflict that the petrochemical requirement could suffer as we go too heavily to try to capture maximum on LNG in this period of international conflict. The government must show competence and have the strength to put things in place so that when it's all said and done, our petrochemical sector can survive and our LNG sector can also survive. If we do what they did with Nutrien and mishandle it, Nutrien will be the first of many. As I speak to you now, you wouldn't hear this from the government. Most of our methanol plants are not functioning because of gas issues. And if at this time, government plays the fool with pricing and government plays the fool through NGC not being properly managed, we could end up with Nutrien being accompanied by others. You wouldn't hear that from the government. They will tell you everything is fine, like they told us before in 2014. That it wasn't gas curtailment. They told us it was maintenance that was going on. And when the maintenance was over, we'll go back to producing gas at the level of 4 BCF per day. When in fact, it was a downhill slide, which has now taken us down to about 2.6 BCF. So we are accustomed to them lying to us or not saying anything. When I was Prime Minister, all of you, except you little young ones, would know that the PLM Prime Minister was always in front of the media. Good days and bad days, I was in front of the media. After cabinet, I was in front of the media. Big issues, I come from abroad, I call a press conference at the airport, meet you all at the airport. If it was too late and you had gone to bed already, I meet you the next day. And you would ask me all kinds of questions because I took responsibility. A prime minister of a country must take responsibility for the situation. You can't be allowed to evade it and hope that it goes away or be pushed away by the next issue. And you sending out tweets of policy, dramatic policy changes. You can't ask the prime minister a question. Is there a question that anybody in the media wanted to ask me in the years that I was prime minister they couldn't ask me? Is there a question that was to be asked? I have had press conferences that last an hour and a half, sometimes almost 2 hours, at Whitehall, at the center. When we had the COVID challenges, I was in front of the media every single day, while my staff was in the courthouse, fighting to keep you alive. Today we have a prime minister who is happier running abroad to shake somebody's hand and don't want to come in front of the local media so you can question them. And these are the people who came into office on the rubric of accountability and transparency, and you can't talk to them. Ministers invoking standing orders in the parliament. They put a criminal in the parliament chair as speaker, and he ruling that you can't ask the prime minister questions that are supplemental. I was prime minister, and when prime minister question time come, that was one of the times when the population was advising on a number of things because the opposition would question me and question me and question me, and I stood there until the time expired. I've never run one day from prime minister question time. One day I went down to Mayaro to visit the flood that was taking place in Mafikeng. I got stuck down there, my vehicle was late. I missed prime minister question time. Then they killed me when I came to the parliament for being late. And one other time, I was in Tobago, and the flight didn't come as it was planned, and I had to miss prime minister question time, and they carry on, and then see them in government today, invoking standing order on behalf of the speaker. Right? He decides that you cannot ask the prime minister supplemental questions. So you know what that means? When you ask the prime minister a question under the standing order of prime minister question time, What you have done, you've given the Prime Minister an opportunity to make a statement because you can't ask any further questions. So he has converted Prime Minister question time to Prime Minister statement time. So the Prime Minister could come down and say all kind of foolishness, hide and duck and lie, and you can't ask a second question because the Speaker, but they say birds of a feather flock together. So these are the issues that I wanted to raise up front. And now if you have any questions, you can talk about them. But just give me a moment to bring some water, please. Yes.
Dr. Rowley, I'm just wondering, given all you've said, so my first question to you is, a year now, you retired, the first sitting Prime Minister to retire from office as a group. Do you have any regrets having done so?
None whatsoever. I must admit that the transition in the PNM didn't go as I anticipated that it might have gone, but that is a PNM matter which I will deal with sometime in the future, not today, as I said sometime. But in terms of the decision to retire, I made that decision in 2020, and I spoke about it publicly on the night of the 2020 election. There were many people, some of the pundits and the columnists describe it as, oh, it's just what politicians do, they fly a kite or a balloon and look to see. I was absolutely certain. And as I said before, it was my intention to leave office in 2020 because I've been in the political arena for a long time. And I never felt that it was my calling from higher reaches. I felt it was a job. It was something I did. I came into it accidentally. I gave it my all. The reason why I did not leave in 2020 was because of COVID. COVID came to us in late 2019, and by the time 2020 came around, we were deep in a pandemic. I thought that it would have been irresponsible of me to leave the country in a pandemic when I could have stayed on and do what I thought was best for the country. So that's no regrets of having left.
What about taking that straw poll in tobacco plantations in terms of handling that transition? Regrets in terms of how you...
No, I am quite happy with the way that was handled. But it was a gamble. I expected a certain kind of response. I didn't get that response. Once the poll itself went fine. You were there when I came out and addressed you, and I told you we met and we had a secret ballot. And before the ballot, we committed to supporting whoever had the majority, and therefore we have a leader. Well, up to that point, everything went fine. But I mean, less well-cemented buildings have collapsed. But I will deal with that at a later date, at another time, and I'm sure there are other people dealing with it too, because we are in opposition. I don't know that is what got us there, maybe. But the bottom line is, the PNM, 70 years, and I'm sure the PNM can do another 70 years.
Are you, Dr. Rowley, are you, as a former Prime Minister, leader of the PNM, as you said, for the length of time that you served as a leader of the PNM, are you happy with the present leadership of the PNM today?
Let's put it this way, Joel. If I was not happy, I wouldn't be talking to you about that. That's a Balize house.
Because I asked the question because...
It's a good question, but I am not going to pontificate on that with you in this way. If I am to express that view, I'll express it voluntarily at another time in another place.
Are you also, because you spoke about a number of things, including the present situation, concerning the government's position, I think in reference to the Shield of the Americans Summit hosted by the US President and the Prime Minister of Trinidad Tobago, having been there, expressing support for that and so on. Do you think that the government presently would have had another alternative in light of the circumstances the government has spoken about in terms of dealing with, as you had said, the word narco-terrorism or other issues?
I have always maintained publicly, from the Prime Minister's position and others, that decision making, especially public sector decision making, is always one of many options. There's no singular way in managing in the political arena. There are options. We chose certain options. We might have been criticized for those options. Our level of success might have been diminished or dismissed by others. A new government come in. They don't have to do what we did. They are free to take other options under the understanding that those options are going to bring greater benefits. When I look at this shield of the Americas, what I see is a table, a head table with the United States President and basically employees to shine this shield. I mentioned the Vietnam War the other day, a while ago. Again, when the discussions were going to take place, I think it was in Paris, to bring an end to the Vietnam War, where the United States and the Viet Cong would have met to discuss the war. For months, they couldn't have the meeting because they couldn't agree on the shape of the table. Because things like this, where you sit at the table is important. When I watch my partners at this place, what I saw was a head at a table and other people standing around. This doesn't tell me that there's any understanding that we are here, at least pretending to have some mutual respect. And for me, what was most important is not who was there, is who wasn't there. Mexico wasn't there. Brazil wasn't there. Uruguay wasn't there. Canada wasn't there. Barbados wasn't there. That was important to me. Because you see, when I went to the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, CARICOM sat with the President of the United States in a working lunch to work out the same issues and to work on the same issues that you see being mentioned here in this shield. When you see, what are we going to deal with under this shield? You will see it's about security, it's about narco trafficking, it's about training. All those things are already in place. They are already in place. They have been in place. The question of how effective they have been, how much more you can become intensified. It's about equipment, right? Those things are in place. You would have seen me as Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister meeting with the head of the US Exim Bank. Why? Because we were trying to get equipment for Trinidad and Tobago. And after many efforts at trying to get equipment, it turned out that we had to buy our own equipment. As bad as the problem is, nobody giving you the equipment that you need. So we went to the Exim Bank, and you did see Rita Joe come to Trinidad and Tobago. She visited. That was part of the whole process of trying to get the equipment that we need. And she put in place, through this government, of my administration, a $500 million window. Question to the government: are you taking that up? Are you going there to get the equipment that we know we need, that we've taken steps to get the funding for? Or are you waiting for somebody to give it to you? I don't know.
So part of this World Charter and signing on to the ACCC, if you have to believe what the US President and the War Secretary is saying, is that this means that the countries who signed on are now going to go harder, that's the term they use, harder against these cartels, agree to use lethal force, And I think the president would have said, just point them out to us and we will deal with them. And a big question we had for the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister, we haven't been able to ask yet, is that the countries will adopt a shoot first policy in its waters, on land. Are they going to, what does this mean for the due process? What does this mean for evidence gathering, prosecution?
And that is precisely, it is in the context of what you have just asked. That is precisely why I took time out in the earlier part of this conversation to dwell on this issue of the government of Trinidad and Tobago from the mouth of the Prime Minister saying, I support your policy. And the policy that is being supported is one of acting outside of the judicial process. And don't fool yourself. Our Prime Minister made statements to that effect before the Secretary of War talked about that. Who said kill them violently? Who told our Coast Guard here before this thing blew up the way it blew up to shoot, well, I can't remember the exact words, but literally take no prisoners, blow them out the water. Right? And it all ties into a conversation inside the country about emptying the matic. That is the approach. You start here to empty the matic. Yeah? Till now, what you're asking, will we continue to do what has been done in our name? And the answer is, that is what the government has said. And the government is quite happy with suspicion. So if you are a fisherman anywhere around this territory, Trinidad or Tobago, and the Coast Guard of Trinidad and Tobago decide to say that they suspect you are involved in narco trafficking, all they have to do is to wipe you out. And that is justified in the war against narco trafficking. They don't have to bring you in. They don't have to bring in any evidence. They suspect and they act. That is what we have signed on to. And to use your phrase, to go harder, the Secretary of whatever it's called, War, says they expect that those who sign on to the shield to go harder is to do more of it. To do more of it. Is that our crime plan? Because my party lost an election to a superior crime plan. Eh? And we have an Attorney General that is telling us that he has British legal advice that it is okay to kill people on the waters around us without a shred of evidence. So the answer to your question is, yes, I expect them to do that because that is now the policy. That's what I'm objecting to.
Are you anticipating a further litigation?
No, what I expect to happen, if the population allows this to develop to its logical conclusion, is a destruction of our society and a damage to the standing of Trinidad and Tobago in the world. Because as we set out to deal with one problem, we have created another one.
We have knowledge in the magnitude of this issue. We've been asking a lot of questions just to make sure that the population is fully aware and we have the truth out there. We've been told recently by the Defense Minister that a lot of the questions that we asked is in terms of national security, they can't answer them and they're legally bound to, and they're legally empowered to not answer us based on security questions we're asking. Where do you stand with that? Because I know at times we would have asked the former administration certain questions, and we were told similarly, national security issues, we can't get into certain details.
I am not sure that it is similarly. If you can point to the specific instance where an equivalent matter, you ask the PNM government. I know you were asking, like for example, sometimes you ask, what are the details of a gas contract? Right? Now, that in the commercial arena, the price at which NGC buys gas is not made public. So even the companies operating in Trinidad and Tobago, they don't know what NGC is paying the other company for the gas. The price at which NGC sells the gas to a user is not known. These are trade secrets. This government come into office and guess what they did? In trying to prove that they're more transparent than the PNM, they go and mention the gas price. You know where that put NGC now? NGC cannot properly negotiate contracts now because everybody know what margin NGC is making on the gas that they're buying, how much they're selling it for, and in the negotiation now, they know how hard to stay, when to dig in their heels and when to give in. Simple as that. So outside of the gas contract, I can't recall where my government said we're not telling you. Of course, there are state secrets. There are a lot of, when you're prime minister of a country, a lot of information come to you, right? I can't sit here as I'm talking to you now and tell you everything I know. I would be irresponsible, because from the prime minister's position, certain things came to me only because I was prime minister. I have to make a judgment now, as the current prime minister has to. Do I tell all of this to the prime minister? When we had the issue with the SSA, I told the parliament, I can tell you, I made a statement, but in the statement I said, I am only able to tell you certain things. I said so to the parliament. So it wasn't a question of saying no to you. I told the parliament that there's more, but I can only tell the parliament so much when the SSA was attended to by the cabinet. The same thing with the Clico matter. When I received the Coleman report, I see people lying about that, but I'll deal with that at another time. When I came in to be prime minister, the Coleman report was being prepared. It was a report from an investigation that was done on television. When the Coleman report came to me as prime minister, I immediately did two things. Came to the cabinet, and a copy went to the GPP. It was my intention to put that report in the parliament, because frankly, this report came out of a television program where people were cross-examined on TV and so on with Clico, the Coleman inquiry. When I went to the parliament, I immediately was advised by the DPP not to lay the report in parliament, because if I do so, it will prevent criminal proceedings from being carried out against people who may have questions to answer. As a responsible prime minister, I took that advice, but I made a short statement in the parliament confirming that the report made recommendations and that some people would have questions to answer. That's all I could have said. Now, after that, I see people accusing me of hiding the report, and hiding the report because the people involved were friends of the PNM and all kind of horse manure, right? The bottom line is that report was stopped from going to the parliament with the understanding that another arm of the state was proceeding to take criminal action against persons who would have had to defend themselves. But the truth dies hard in some people's quarters. That's the fact, not the facts. But if you can tell me of one other instance where you wanted information from my government and we hide behind national security. I can recall a minister in the PNM government when I was there invoking that standing order and saying, as a result of which, I can't answer the question. The number of instances they're using everything now, because they've been using now the discretion of the speaker. It is to the speaker's discretion. Look at what happened the other day. On Private Members' Day, where this is the only preserve of a day in the parliament. Private members are there willing and ready to engage to speak on behalf of their constituents, and the speaker makes a ruling that I've heard enough. And therefore the debate must end on a motion contrived by somebody else in the House, preventing members of parliament from speaking. That's where we are. That's where we're going.
We haven't heard anything officially about Dr. Rowley about the reason why that radar has been removed from Tobago. We heard phrases about the radar prior to that in terms of how it helps our national security apparatus. But we haven't heard why it was removed so suddenly. But we were told that it was coming, but no rationale as to why it's being removed. On top of that, people are starting to question if the radar was there specifically for the purpose of the abduction, kidnapping, or the arrest of former Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro, and now that's over, they will leave the radar behind.
But Avinash, sorry, not call it Avinash. Sorry about that. Akash, where is your own understanding of a situation like that? If you had looked at the specification of that radar, as some people would have done, you would have seen it is specifically designed and used in a particular way for targeting. It's a radar to assist with targeting, not to prevent us, not to protect us from people coming to us. And we still have the problem, unless the government is prepared to say to us that the problem of narco trafficking and drug dealing and arms running and women handling, that have gone, so we now have no further need for it. Unless the government is prepared to say we have no further need as we had earlier in the year, it is clear that this piece of mobile equipment came into our country for a particular purpose. And the purpose had very little to do with narco trafficking. Narco trafficking is the tool, as I said to you earlier on, the statement, a tool to bring about the political maneuvering. The political maneuvering is over. They have got what they wanted out of Venezuela. They now speak of high praise of the Venezuelan government and the corporation in Venezuela. Maduro is in jail in New York, and Trinidad and Tobago is here talking a lot of foolishness about we having solved crime in Trinidad and Tobago with the American radar. I'm sure they're laughing at us for being, we were described in a particular way by the president before, and I'm sure that they talk to themselves after and say, see what I tell you? They must be laughing at us. And we are proud to have gone to be part of a shield when we have been so used. And I could tell you, I was prime minister of this country for years. And a lot of what would have been said to this prime minister was said to me. It is just that a PNM prime minister coming out of a party that Eric Williams formed in this country, right? Who believe in our nationalism, believe in our sovereignty, believe in our self-respect, and knew that our non-aligned status had value to us. We acted in a particular way, and another government acted in this way. Not
the US would have approached the US Prime Minister to install military assets and to have.
There's nothing new under the sun. Nothing new under the sun. It may not have been in the same words. It may not have been by the same person, but we see the United States as an entity. Doesn't matter who is in the White House. We dealt with the United States government. We dealt with the United States people. And it doesn't matter who they vote for. That is their right to vote for who they want to vote for. I could tell you, when we did all this to and fro between here and New York and Washington in fighting for Trinidad and Tobago's interests, when it was important to us to get an OFAC license, we dealt with people in the Democratic Party, we dealt with Republicans. A lot of the meetings, both there and in the Caribbean, was a question of dealing with elements of the United States government. Right? But you may recall, when I was Prime Minister in the first Trump administration, there was a meeting in Mar-a-Lago. I wasn't there, just because I wasn't invited. Barbados took the position that if Trinidad and Tobago is not invited, unfortunately, I will not be able to participate. And this game has been going on for a long time. And the splintering of CARICOM had been people's objective a long time ago. We had to resist that. And our Prime Minister is not the first one who behaved like that. There were others. But we held CARICOM together because we genuinely believe that together we are stronger. Together we can be listened to. When the attempt was made, remember there was a time Europe gave Maduro 8 days to leave office? And Bolton was walking around with a notepad written in big bold, 15,000 Colombian troops for Venezuela. Remember that story? CARICOM beat a healthy trip to New York to the office of the Secretary General of the United Nations. I was part of that delegation, authorized by CARICOM, myself, the Prime Minister of Barbados, and the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis. The three of us went to the United Nations because at that time, intervention in Venezuela was virtually a given. The Secretary General spoke in response to our intervention. CARICOM, not Trinidad Tobago, CARICOM, but Trinidad Tobago was in the leadership of that. And when the Secretary General spoke, saying that as far as the United Nations is concerned, the government of Venezuela is the Maduro government. That didn't please others, so it took a few years to get to another state with another Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister, and they got joy.
Dr. Rowley, this one. So now we are in a state of emergency. In the Parliament, with the General of the elections, on more than one occasion to the state of emergency called under your administration, I think at the end of 2024. I'm talking about there's no distinction, there's a distinction, there's a difference between the SOE that was called under your administration and the two SOEs called under the present government. Do you have any response to that?
An emergency is either an emergency or it's not an emergency. All I will say to that debate in the Parliament that took place the last Friday, the government was required to tell the Parliament what was the reason for the emergency. No such thing happened. They talked about it. If I was a fly on the wall in President's house, I would have really been keen to know what they told the president to get the president to agree to that state of emergency. But they certainly did not tell the Parliament that, you see, an emergency is something out of the ordinary. It can't be that I feel that this will help me. I feel that this will work. I want to use an emergency as it can't be that. You are required to say about a specific abnormality. A state of emergency requires an abnormality to exist or to be imminent. And you want to head it off. Or it has existed and you want to intervene. It can't be I had one and I see the murder go down. I want another one. I want a third one, because we are what? This is the third one into the fourth one. This would be the fourth one. One from the PNM, right? And this is the third one from this government. There was two before.
One and there was an extension.
Anyway, okay. But I'm saying this one was after a period of normalcy. What was the abnormality that developed that caused this one? And they went to the Parliament, and there was nobody on the government side who pointed to the abnormality that can be labeled as an emergency.
Another thing you raised.
And that needs to be looked at in the context of the Constitution, because what they have done is an ongoing removal of your constitutional rights as a crime plan. When we were never of the view that the state of emergency, a lot of people were asking for a state of emergency under the PNM. And as Prime Minister, I was being attacked for not taking on the issue and not being concerned about people being killed. But it was because we never felt that a state of emergency is in fact an effective crime plan. The police eventually convinced us in a situation where they showed us where these people were prepared to go to war among themselves, and we have to intervene to stop that bloodletting. We did that with a state of emergency, and as soon as the first period ended, we ended the state of emergency. So when the new government came in, that state of emergency had been ended because that situation had been, right? And we could have told the Parliament and could have told the country the reason, right? We have since had states of emergency. This is a new one, and I dare say, I did not see a case being made for an abnormality which could have been called an emergency. But they don't have to. We have the majority in the Parliament, put up anything to the Parliament, vote it into law, and we go with it. That's how we're being governed.
Because you brought it up, so I'm going to ask this question to you, because you're responding to what the Prime Minister said about how the construction of the new Balancing House building was funded. Could you see how it was funded?
We raised money for 15 years to take action at Balancing House. 15 years. The property at Balancing House, number 1 and number 2, Tranquility Street, the party got those properties way back in the 60s, I think it was, by members, foundation members who were in a position to buy those properties. There are 2 house spots, those are house spots. Buy them and give it to the party. You could call them financiers, whatever you want, but when the party was formed, we got those 2 parts. One first and then the car park. And we started, in fact, the old Balancing House, before the renovated Balancing House, had reached a point where we couldn't go upstairs because the floor had become dangerous. But we couldn't do anything about the building. But we could think about it. We went and we strengthened the floor to be able to use upstairs. You might have been there as a person and so on. There was an attic above that was locked off. And of course, it took us 15 years, going back to my first campaign manager in this constituency was a fellow called Charles Patterson. When they were down here, he was my campaign manager. He was a trustee of the PNM. And he was the first person who raised with me, as trustee of the PNM, the need for us to take action to begin to do something about the old building and, of course, and to build on the new building, the new where the car park was. We got an income, considerable income, from renting out that car park. That new building that you see there are 2 floors of parking there. We see that as a potential income earner. There's significant income to be earned from that. And we spent 15 years of my time aggressively putting together funds to be able to embark on the building of that new building. And another arm for the party, others did the old job and some masonry work and a new roof and so on. We did that. Our party is 70 years old. And if after 70 years, with over 100,000 members, we can't raise money to build a place to be out of the rain, too bad for those who are jealous. But when you come to accuse us of criminal conduct in that exercise, I call you a jamet and a liar, because you are tarnishing other people. If you had done the same thing for your party, you might have had a headquarters, but they raise money for their own pocket. Eh? The PNM, among the things we did, we asked party members to contribute in a Barabic program. You know what that means? If you could pay $10, pay $10. If you could pay $15, $20, some members helped with that. We had members who are wealthy and well off who said, I'll help you with this, I'll help you with that. We raised money to get from the Minister of Finance to raise $15 million by way of raffle. But to get the money, you had to go and sell the tickets. We did that, and we didn't do it in 1 year. There were a number of raffles we had. Right? So I am not going to be engaged with anybody who look at it and say, well, I wonder. And drug trafficking. Let me tell you something. When I became leader of the PNM in 2010, you know what I met in the first days of being PNM leader? I received a call from a major bank in Trinidad. The head of the bank called me to tell me that the PNM owes the bank $4 million. You ever hear a political party borrowing money in bank to run an election and then lose the election and then leave a new leader to pay off $4 million because a bank, and what asset all you have? You have one asset, was Balancing House. Understand? I had to send the treasurer of the party to the bank to use his begging skills to beg off from the interest, and then took years of party members' contribution and office holders' contribution to pay it off. Because another thing too, we in the PNM, when we get office, we acknowledge that we got that office on the strength of the PNM. And against that background, there's a standing requirement in the PNM where every office holder, prime minister, opposition leader, mayor, councillor, you pay 5% of your earnings to the party every month. That revenue stream helps to run the party, and it helps us to pay off debts that we have incurred here and there. The PNM is an organism that lives by virtue of ensuring that we work into the future. Right? It took me years to pay off that $4 million as PNM leader. We have elections to fight. You know any other political party in this country owe a bank for election money? One of my colleagues in a dire situation in the PNM, not under my stewardship, but under stewardship, had provided a loan to the PNM of $1 million. Never got it back. So when you hear people talking about the PNM, they don't know anything about the PNM. And their members in their party should ask them, where are your headquarters? Where was your effort for the last 15 years to get a party headquarters? This is your third or fourth go around in government. The party is how many years old? We handle things differently. As Prime Minister for all the years I was there, every month before I see my salary, 5% go to Balize House. Opposition leader, same thing. So they can make these allegations. It is for you to ask them for support for the allegations they're making. And if you can't support it, then you are irresponsible and malicious. But when a prime minister goes to the parliament and accuses a political party in our country of being so close and involved with narco traffickers, that goes beyond the pale. You're telling the world that our country is corrupted by narco traffickers to the point where we need the armies of another country to come and fight a war to protect us from narco traffickers. You really figure the people killing people in the zone and in Laventil and elsewhere over the local turf, that the American military are going to come in here and help us do that? But we want two things. We want effective, modern policing, and we also want to understand and accept that violent crime is a public health issue in Trinidad and Tobago. Trying to personalize it and put it on the PNM shoulder, and if I come into office, murderers will stop murdering people. You'll see the proof of that already. They were telling people, when the PNM is in office, murders go up. That is the kind of foolishness they've been talking. And that's why they could come now when they're in government and they're not making any significant change. You come now and raise the ante of trying to smear and tarnish the PNM. People who are not PNM members in this country, who have never voted PNM, if they examine the facts of their circumstance, they will realize that they owe the PNM a debt of gratitude. There's not a family in this country who has not been positively impacted by a PNM policy that changed their family or their individual life. I'm living proof of that. Every one of my brothers were brighter than me. I'm the only one because I was the youngest one, because public policy came too late for them. Today, the economy of Trinidad and Tobago is an economy where we judge ourselves against the world. But how did it get so? How did it get so? Successive years of PNM administration moved this country along from being a colonial backwater. Everybody who goes to hospital in Trinidad and Tobago today, they want all the benefits of the leading edge technology. When the PNM took over this country, going to hospital was to get a bandage. That's what it was, to get a bandage. And I want to ask the Prime Minister while you're on this, what is your position with respect to the use of Cuban medical personnel in Trinidad and Tobago? Tell the country that. Answer those questions to the country because you are the Prime Minister. Right? Don't hide from the population. Don't hide from the press. And you all need to get answers to those questions. There's a Minister of Health. Let him tell you. We have used the Cuban experiment. Cuba trains people, spending Cuban resources, and then send these people abroad, give them opportunity to be doctors and nurses and other healthcare givers, and they go abroad and they contribute back to the government to run the program. Somebody come and tell you that is human trafficking. What Devant Maraj told you about the man that you make a minister, that is not human trafficking. But a policy where a country provides training and pays people the market rate in the country, you know, aping and echoing that. Trinidad and Tobago provides nurses to Canada and the UK. Every so often, people that we train here pay to put them in school and whatever. When they become nurses, people come and recruit them and carry them abroad and put them in their hospital abroad. That's been happening for decades. Is it that we are trafficking in humans? When we send people abroad on government scholarship, my children want government scholarship. So when they finish, what is the story? Don't they have to come back here and provide service to the country or pay back the money? Somebody come and tell you a program that in Cuba where medical service is provided by a training program in that country, and then the people go out and work. The Cubans who work here, are they really enslaved? You know that? Have you all been to any institution and meet any of them in hospitals here?
There's also a humanitarian crisis right now in Cuba due to the blockade. And I was planning to ask you as possibly last question. One more. What do you think about how this country's foreign policy is handling that Cuba situation?
Well, I should ask what you should know. I would want to know what is the position of the government of Trinidad and Tobago on this matter. I, as a former Prime Minister of recent vintage, I signed on to a document of about a dozen former CARICOM Prime Ministers expressing our position from a humanitarian standpoint that what is happening there is inhumane. And what is, you know what it is? You know that is forbidden by the United Nations. That behavior against Cuba, that kind of behavior is forbidden if the world is to be a better place. The United Nations Charter forbid you from doing that. What is to prevent them from doing it elsewhere? Because I support your policy. The policy is might is right. Did our Prime Minister see the statement made in the Munich conference by the American Secretary of State? That is the policy we support. That Europe must get up and reclaim its position of being a colonial master in the world. Well, Eric Williams taught us too long and too well to accept a new colonialism. So other people can have their point of view, yes. We can hear you, but we can disagree with you. What our country is saying is that we're not going to disagree with anybody saying anything as long as they befriend us and tell us who our friends must be. Losing our non-aligned status has in fact cost us our self-respect on international issues of geopolitics. Our Prime Minister has a lot to answer for, and she has answered none of the questions, whether it is on Palestine, whether it is on racism, whether it is on blockading Cuba. There's a video of her speaking up for Cuba in the presence of Maduro, right? But something has happened and she has been transformed into being the person who has destroyed Trinidad and Tobago's currency on matters of an international standing. We are far worse off now. And I tell the population something I noticed on the Facebook comments, a lot of people talking about, well, we can get gas from Venezuela and we can get gas. Really? Is that how you go about getting what you want from a neighbor or from a friend? Really? Let me give you the last point I want to make on this matter. Remember a fella came from India a member of parliament from India, very well, one of the richest families in India, business house, came to Trinidad and Tobago and expressed an interest in our refinery and wanted to undertake a $500 million investment. And the person came here from Venezuela. Because when I went to Mumbai and I met with the group of businessmen in Mumbai about Trinidad and Tobago, one of the things I spoke about was the refinery. That group of people said, we have a colleague who is in Venezuela and we'll get on to him and let him come to Trinidad. He came, Mr. Jindal, remember him? And the minute he came here to show an interest in the refinery, he sent his team, when he got back to India, they came and they looked at the refinery and they committed that they will get involved with the process with the government to see what they can do. The UNC launched an attack on the man and his business. And one of the attacks was that he wanted to bring Venezuelan oil here. Remember that story? Let me ask you a question. Suppose what has happened here now had actually happened because it was preordained by God. And Jindal was in fact in a position to bring Venezuelan oil to a refinery in Trinidad and Tobago. What would have been Trinidad and Tobago's position now? Would you have been better off? Or are we better off now with the refinery? We don't know what's going on with the refinery. All we're hearing is that this one, that one, this one, that one, and the OWTU. This one, that one, that one, that one, and the OWTU. These are questions that you need to put to the Prime Minister and the government. There's a Minister of Energy who has not sat down on a single table with the government when the government is dealing with energy matters. Are you all aware of that? Energy is our lifeblood. The Minister of Energy, whose portfolio is that product, has not been part of the delegation at no time. These are the people. When I sent Stuart Young to the first Guyana Energy Conference, because I was busy dealing with other matters here, and Minister Young went from the Prime Minister's office, they come to Parliament and raise Cain that I had not gone to Venezuela because I am friendly with Granger and I'm not talking to Irfan Ali. Irfan Ali is one of my closest colleagues in CARICOM. But they knew that the Prime Minister was supposed to be there. But today, all kind of energy business taking place. But the person who is missing, the chairman of the NGC is threatening our business at Point Lisas and is destroying the NGC. Where's the minister? Who is talking for the NGC? The chairman. Who is harassing companies? The chairman. Who is making decisions on contracts like they want to increase the price of gas when people talking about going home? The chairman. Are you all aware of that? But you can't ask the Prime Minister nothing because she is not prepared to come before you in her 90.
Dr. Olivi, the other question I have for you. In the year that you have retired as Prime Minister, there was an election in Tobago, and we saw the result of the election. PNM suffered a tremendous loss at that election. Being a Tobagonian itself, and also having led the PNM to elections in Trinidad and Tobago, have you had a chance to reflect on what happened in that election and how the PNM could find its way back as it were into the...
I have not really been involved too much in Tobago, and I'm not particularly put out by that. Maybe it's because I've been there, done that on too many occasions. I might be a little too optimistic. But one thing I know for sure is that popularity is not permanent. Right? And what I've learned in the political arena, having been there, I was in Tobago as a Tobagonian, as you said, when the PNM lost parliamentary seats, both parliamentary seats, and the PNM, we used to control the Tobago County Council. And in 1980, the first THA election took place. That was my first outing with the PNM in Tobago. And we lost 8-4. And way back then, my friends, some of my friends in Tobago were telling me, boy, what are you wasting time with the PNM? For the PNM dead in Tobago, the PNM can't come back in Tobago. And then the next election, we won 1 seat, 11-1 we lost. more than once. And my friends keep telling me, but the PNM could never come back in Tobago, PNM dead in Tobago. That was their position, because they thought popularity was permanent. But I was there one night when the PNM won all 12 seats. Listen, what has to happen is that the PNM needs to do what needs to be done, which is to get new leadership. I understand that there's an election to come, there's a campaign, people can offer themselves. I hope people offer themselves, because the trouble is if nobody offer him or herself. That's what the trouble is going to be. And the PNM in Tobago has a number of young people, fortunately, whose job it is now to pick up the country, the party's bed and walk. The PNM in Tobago is an autonomous part of the party, and for that, we should feel comforted, because it's PNM business being handled in Tobago among Tobagonians. And I hope that they let the strength of the party prevail. If you're in opposition, you are in opposition. You have to justify being wanted in government. And to do so, you have to conduct yourself in a particular way. And the PNM has to demonstrate that it has what it takes to conduct itself, to be called back to service. But I'm optimistic that sometime in the not too distant future, that sort of 0-0 situation will change. Yeah? But the people's...
Just to be reflective to it. This is building on a question you asked earlier. Is there one particular thing that you wish you would have handled differently? That you, now a year out of office, have you pinpointed one thing that you look back and said, I should have done that a bit differently, and I may have gotten you took a gamble, and you may have gotten the payout that you expected?
Yeah, I'm doing a little bit of writing, and it requires doing what you say there, to reflect on how things have gone, because you know have hindsight of certain things. And there are one or two things that are surfacing, and I will tell you about that in the not too distant future. But certainly my stewardship, my tenure was not one of perfection, because as I say, there are options. You're always choosing one of many options, and sometimes the option you choose did not pan out, or there were other options with the fluctuation of time would have emerged as a better option after. But you know, two out of three ain't bad. You know how to? You know how to? You don't know how to? Come on, Joel. Huh? No, it's go and look. I think there's meatloaf. A singer called Meatloaf. So, two out of three ain't bad. Thank you all very much for coming and spending some time with me. I am celebrating a year of retirement. I am very happy that I've lived to do that. And I trust that, God willing, maybe next year I could celebrate another year. And we can meet and see what transpired in the last year. So far, the country is trying to middle. We need to confront our demons. We need to stop personalizing our circumstance. We need to stop hiding, and the people who are in charge of our affairs must stop lying to us. If you want to carry the mandate that you got, this thing about hiding and sending out tweets and being guided by, foreigners who are telling us how to run the country, that is going to get Trinidad Tobago into big trouble. Thank you all very much.
Feel the power.